The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store in Benton, Arkansas, and Thaddeus Ashford watched a woman climb down with one arm hanging at an unnatural angle, her face pale but set with determination that made his breath catch in his throat. It was July 1876, and the summer heat shimmered off the dirt street as he stepped forward from where he had been leaning against the hitching post, his worn hat pushed back on his head. He had been expecting a mail-order bride, yes, but not one who looked like she had wrestled a bear and lived to tell the tale. "You must be Thaddeus Ashford," she said, her voice steady despite the obvious pain etched around her eyes. "I am Theresa Garrett. I apologize for my appearance. There was an accident on the road 2 days back." Thaddeus removed his hat, his calloused hands gripping the brim as he took in the sight of her. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a braid that had seen better days, and green eyes that held a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Her dress was dusty and torn at the hem, and that arm, good Lord, that arm was definitely broken. "Madam, we need to get you to Doc Holloway right away," he said, moving toward her, but she took a step back, nearly stumbling on the uneven boardwalk. "I said it myself," she said firmly. "On the second night, the bone was displaced and I knew it would heal wrong if I waited. I used 2 straight branches and strips from my petticoat. It will be fine in time." Thaddeus stared at her, something shifting in his chest that felt like admiration mixed with concern and something else he could not quite name. He was 27 years old, had been working cattle and horses since he was barely tall enough to reach a stirrup, and he had seen plenty of rough men who would have cried like babies over a broken bone. This woman had set her own arm and then continued on to meet a stranger she had agreed to marry through letters exchanged over 6 months. "Even so, Doc should look at it," he said more gently. "Make sure it is healing proper." She studied him for a long moment, and he felt the weight of her assessment. He knew what she saw. A tall man with sun-darkened skin, brown hair that needed cutting, blue eyes that probably looked too serious, and clothes that were clean but worn from hard work. He owned a ranch about 5 miles outside of Benton, a modest spread with good water and decent grazing land that he had built up over the past 8 years. "Very well," she finally agreed. "But first, I would like some water if you do not mind. The journey has been long." "Of course," Thaddeus said, his manners returning to him. "There is a pump right here, and then we can get your trunk and head to the doctor." He worked the pump handle, and cool well water splashed into the tin cup he pulled from his saddlebag. She took it with her good hand and drank deeply, and he noticed how her throat worked as she swallowed, noticed the delicate line of her neck despite the dust and exhaustion. When she handed the cup back, their fingers brushed, and he felt that strange jolt again. The stage driver had already unloaded a modest trunk and a carpet bag, setting them on the boardwalk. Thaddeus paid the man the remainder of the fare and hefted the trunk easily, gesturing toward his wagon hitched nearby. "I was expecting you a week ago," he said as they walked. "I was getting worried. There was a delay in Memphis," Theresa explained, walking carefully beside him. "A bridge was washed out from storms and we had to take a longer route. Then the accident happened when one of the horses spooked at a snake. The coach overturned and I was thrown clear, but I landed badly." She paused, then added with a hint of something that might have been humor, "I suppose I should be grateful it was only my arm." Thaddeus loaded her belongings into the wagon bed, then turned to help her up onto the seat. She hesitated, clearly trying to figure out how to manage with one arm, and he said quietly, "May I?" At her nod, he placed his hands on her waist and lifted her easily onto the seat. She was lighter than he expected, and he wondered when she had last eaten a proper meal. Once he climbed up beside her and took the reins, he guided the team down the main street of Benton toward the doctor's office at the far end. The town was small but growing, with a bank, 2 saloons, a general store, a church, and various other businesses lining the dusty street. The Arkansas heat pressed down on them, and Thaddeus noticed how Theresa swayed slightly in her seat. "Just a bit farther," he said, concern sharpening his voice. "Hold on now." "I am not going to faint," she said, but her words lacked conviction. "I have come too far to swoon like some delicate flower." "No one would think you delicate," Thaddeus said, and then worried that sounded like an insult. "I mean, you are clearly strong. What you did, setting your own arm, that takes courage most men do not have." She glanced at him, and for the first time, he saw a small smile touch her lips. "Thank you for saying so. I was raised on a farm in Ohio. My father believed that everyone should know how to take care of themselves. When my mother died of fever 5 years ago, it was just him and me and my younger brother. We learned to be resourceful." "What happened to your father?" Thaddeus asked, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of a neat white building with a sign that read, "Dr. M. Halloway, Physician." Theresa's expression closed off slightly. "He passed last year, kicked by a horse. My brother went to live with our uncle in Cincinnati, but there was no room for me there. My uncle's wife made that quite clear, so I answered your advertisement in the newspaper." Thaddeus felt a surge of anger toward people he had never met, people who would turn away family in need. He climbed down and came around to help her, and this time she accepted his assistance without hesitation. As they walked into the doctor's office, he found himself thinking that whatever had brought her here, he was glad she had come. Dr. Michael Halloway was a middle-aged man with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He looked up from the medical journal he was reading and immediately stood when he saw Theresa's arm. "Good afternoon, Thad," he said, then focused on Theresa. "And you must be Miss Garrett. I heard you were expected. Let me have a look at that arm." Theresa sat in the chair the doctor indicated, and Thaddeus stood nearby, hat in hand, as Doc Halloway carefully examined the makeshift splint. He asked questions about when the injury had occurred, how she had set it, and whether she had experienced fever or increased pain. Theresa answered each question calmly and precisely. "Well, young lady," the doctor finally said, sitting back with an expression of professional respect, "you did a remarkably good job. The bone is aligned properly, and while there is swelling, I see no signs of infection. Whoever taught you field medicine taught you well. My father was a veterinarian before he bought the farm," Theresa explained. "He often treated people as well as animals in our community. I assisted him from the time I was 12. "I am going to replace your splint with a proper one and provide you with a sling," Doc Halloway said. "You will need to keep it immobilized for at least 6 more weeks. No heavy lifting, no strenuous activity. The bone should heal clean if you are careful." As the doctor worked, Thaddeus watched Theresa's face. She did not flinch, though he could see the tension around her eyes when the doctor adjusted the splint. She had grit, this woman who had traveled hundreds of miles to marry a stranger, who had survived an accident and tended her own injury without complaint. When the doctor finished, he gave Theresa a small bottle of laudanum for pain and instructed her to return in 2 weeks for him to check the healing. Thaddeus paid the fee and guided Theresa back out to the wagon. "We should get you some food," he said as he helped her up. "There is a restaurant that serves decent meals, and then we can head out to the ranch." "I do not wish to impose," Theresa began, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud rumble that made them both pause. "No imposition," Thaddeus said firmly. "You need to eat, and I reckon we should talk some before we head out." The restaurant was a small establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who served home-style cooking that reminded Thaddeus of his own mother's meals before she had passed 10 years ago. They sat at a corner table, and he ordered chicken and dumplings for both of them, along with cornbread and coffee. As they waited for the food, an awkward silence settled between them. They had exchanged letters, yes, but those had been carefully composed thoughts on paper. This was different, sitting across from each other in the flesh, knowing that they were supposed to build a life together. "I should be honest with you," Theresa said suddenly, her good hand wrapped around her coffee cup. "I answered your advertisement because I had no other options. My uncle made it clear I was not welcome, and I had no means to support myself in Ohio. The farm was sold to pay debts. I did not come here expecting love or romance. I came here expecting work and a roof over my head, and I am prepared to fulfill my duties as a wife in exchange for that security." Her directness caught Thaddeus off guard. In her letters, she had been more reserved, sharing information about her skills and background, but nothing so blunt. He respected the honesty, even as something in him protested the cold practicality of her words. "I understand," he said slowly. "I will be honest too. I advertised for a wife because this land is lonely and a ranch needs more than one person to thrive. I am not looking for some grand romance either. I am looking for a partner, someone who can work beside me and help build something lasting." He paused, then added, "But I also believe in treating people with respect and kindness. You will have your own space until you are comfortable with other arrangements. I will not force anything on you." Theresa's eyes met his, and he saw surprise there, followed by something that might have been relief. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That is more consideration than I expected." The food arrived, and they ate in a more comfortable silence. Thaddeus found himself watching her between bites, noting how she ate with careful precision despite her injury. How she thanked Mrs. Patterson graciously when the woman refilled their coffee. There was a dignity to her, a strength that had nothing to do with physical prowess and everything to do with character. After the meal, they walked back to the wagon, and Thaddeus drove them out of town toward his ranch. The road wound through gentle hills covered in pine and oak, with the afternoon sun filtering through the branches. The air was thick with humidity, typical for Arkansas in summer, and the sound of cicadas filled the air. "Tell me about your ranch," Theresa said, breaking the comfortable quiet that had settled between them. "It is called the Broken Creek Ranch," Thaddeus said, keeping his eyes on the road. "Named for the creek that runs through the property. I have about 300 acres, most of it good grazing land. I run about 80 head of cattle and a dozen horses. I also have chickens, a few pigs, and a milk cow. There is a main house, a barn, a bunkhouse that is mostly empty now since I cannot afford regular hired hands and various outbuildings." "It sounds substantial," Theresa said. "How did you come to own it?" "My father and I homesteaded the land 12 years ago when I was 15, Thaddeus explained. "We built it up from nothing. He died 6 years ago during a harsh winter. Pneumonia took him. Since then, I have been running it alone, hiring day workers when I need extra hands, but mostly managing on my own." He glanced at her. "It is hard work, I will not lie to you about that. The days are long and there is always something that needs doing. But the land is good and I have built up a decent herd. We will not be rich, but we will not starve either." "I am not afraid of hard work," Theresa said. "I may be limited for the next few weeks because of my arm, but once it heals, I can help with whatever needs doing. I can cook, clean, tend animals, and I know basic carpentry and mending. My father made sure I could handle most anything that came up on a farm." "I believe you," Thaddeus said, and he meant it. This woman had already proven herself tougher than most people he knew. They rounded a bend, and the ranch came into view. The house was a solid two-story structure built of logs and planed lumber, with a wide porch across the front and a stone chimney rising from one end. The barn was large and well-maintained, painted red with white trim that had faded somewhat over the years. Fences marked off pastures where cattle grazed, and chickens scratched in the yard near the house. "It is a fine place," Theresa said, and Thaddeus heard genuine appreciation in her voice. "You have done well." "Thank you," he said, surprised by how much her approval meant to him. He pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. "Let me show you inside." He helped her down and retrieved her trunk, carrying it up the porch steps and through the front door. The interior was neat but sparse, clearly the home of a man who spent most of his time outdoors. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, shelves holding dishes and supplies, and a cookstove in one corner. A door led to a bedroom on the ground floor, and a ladder led to a loft above. "I have been using the loft," Thaddeus said, setting her trunk down. "I thought you might prefer the bedroom down here, at least for now. It has a proper bed and some privacy. I cleaned it out this week and put fresh linens on the bed." Theresa walked to the bedroom door and looked inside. It was a simple room with a bed, a dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a small window that looked out toward the barn. Clean and functional, nothing fancy but private and secure. "This is more than adequate," she said, turning back to him. "Thank you." "I will bring your things in," Thaddeus said. "You should rest. You have had a long journey and your arm needs to heal." "I am fine," Theresa protested, but even as she spoke, he could see the exhaustion catching up with her. The adrenaline that had kept her going was clearly wearing off. "Rest," he said more firmly. "I will handle the evening chores. There is water in the pitcher, and I will bring you something light for supper later. Tomorrow will be soon enough to talk about everything else." For a moment he thought she might argue, but then she nodded. "Very well, but tomorrow I begin earning my keep." He carried her trunk into the bedroom and left her to settle in, heading back outside to tend to the animals. As he worked, he found his thoughts returning again and again to the woman now under his roof. She was not what he had expected, though he was hard-pressed to say exactly what he had expected. Someone more conventional, perhaps, someone who fit the mold of what a wife should be. But Theresa Garrett was clearly her own person, forged by hardship and loss into something resilient and unyielding. By the time he finished the chores, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He returned to the house and found Theresa sitting at the table, her injured arm resting in its sling. She had washed her face and changed into a clean dress, and her hair was braided neatly over one shoulder. "I thought I told you to rest," he said, but there was no heat in his words. "I rested for an hour," she replied. "Then I grew restless. I am not accustomed to idleness." Thaddeus shook his head but found himself almost smiling. "I can see that. Are you hungry?" "I could eat," she admitted. He prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, cold chicken left from yesterday, and apples from the root cellar. They ate together at the table, and this time the silence was easier, more natural. After the meal, Theresa insisted on helping clean up despite her injury, and they developed an awkward but functional rhythm with her washing one-handed while he dried and put away. As darkness fell, Thaddeus lit the lamps, and they sat at the table with coffee. This was when he would normally sit alone and plan the next day's work, perhaps read from the Bible or one of the few books he owned. Having someone else there felt strange and yet oddly comfortable. "There is something we should discuss," Theresa said, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. You said we would not marry right away, that you would give me time to adjust. But I feel I should tell you that I am prepared to fulfill the terms of our agreement whenever you wish. I do not expect special treatment because of my injury." Thaddeus studied her across the table, this woman who had traveled so far and survived so much. "What terms do you think we agreed to?" "I become your wife in truth," she said, her voice steady but her eyes fixed on her coffee. "I manage your household, help with the work, and provide you with children eventually. In exchange, you provide for me and treat me fairly. That is the usual arrangement for situations like ours, is it not?" "I suppose it is," Thaddeus said slowly, "but I would add something to that. I would like us to at least try to be friends, companions. This will be a hard life at times, and it will be harder still if we are just two people sharing space without any real connection." Theresa looked up at him, surprise clear on her face. "Friends? Is that so strange?" he asked. "We will be living together, working together. I would rather do that with someone I can talk to, someone I can rely on, than with a stranger who just happens to sleep under the same roof." "No," she said slowly. "It is not strange. It is just more than I expected." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I would like that, to be friends." "Good," Thaddeus said, feeling that odd warmth in his chest again. "Then that is where we will start. As for the rest, there is time. We can be married by Reverend Michael's in town whenever you feel ready. There is no rush." They talked a while longer, carefully sharing more details about their lives, their habits, their expectations. Theresa explained that she woke early and preferred to be productive, that she did not tolerate laziness or dishonesty, and that she had a temper though she worked to control it. Thaddeus admitted that he sometimes became too focused on work and forgot to eat, that he valued straightforward communication over hints and games, and that he had little patience for town politics or gossip. By the time they retired for the night, Thaddeus felt they had made a good start. He climbed to the loft while Theresa closed herself in the bedroom, and as he lay on his narrow bed looking up at the dark rafters, he found himself hoping that this arrangement would work out better than he had dared to hope. The next morning, Thaddeus woke before dawn as always and went about his morning routine quietly, trying not to disturb Theresa. But when he came in from milking the cow, he found her already up, dressed, and attempting to build a fire in the cook-stove with one hand. "Let me do that," he said, setting down the milk pail. "I can manage," she insisted, but he could see the frustration on her face as she struggled with the kindling. "I know you can," he said gently, "but there is no shame in accepting help when you need it. Your arm needs to heal, remember. Let me help you until it does, and then you can do as much as you want." She stepped back reluctantly, and he quickly built up the fire and got the stove going. Together, they prepared breakfast, working out a system where she directed, and he did the tasks that required two hands. They made flapjacks and bacon and brewed strong coffee, and by the time they sat down to eat, Thaddeus felt they had accomplished something significant in that simple cooperation. "What needs doing today?" Theresa asked as they ate. "I need to ride out and check the herd in the north pasture," Thaddeus said. "Make sure none of the cattle have wandered through the fences, check for illness or injury. After that, there is mending to do on the barn door, and I should look at the roof of the chicken coop. I think raccoons have been trying to get in at night." "Can I come with you?" Theresa asked. "When you check the herd, I mean. I have not been on a horse in weeks, but I can ride, and I would like to see the property." Thaddeus hesitated. "Are you sure you are up to it, with your arm?" "I can ride," she said firmly. "I will not gallop or do anything foolish, but I can sit a horse at a walk, please. I do not want to spend the day sitting idle in the house." He understood that restlessness, that need to be doing something useful. "All right," he agreed. "But you tell me immediately if you are in pain or feeling faint." "I will," she promised. After breakfast, they walked to the barn together. Thaddeus saddled his gelding, a steady bay named Duke, and chose a gentle mare named Rosie for Theresa. He helped her mount, careful of her injured arm, and watched to make sure she was secure in the saddle before swinging up onto his own horse. They rode out across the ranch at an easy walk, and Thaddeus pointed out various landmarks. The creek that gave the ranch its name, the best grazing areas, the line of trees that marked the eastern boundary. Theresa asked intelligent questions about the land, the water sources, the quality of the grass. She had clearly been raised on a working farm and understood what made land valuable or challenging. The herd was grazing peacefully in the north pasture, and Thaddeus did a careful count, checking for any animals that looked off. Everything seemed in order, and he was about to suggest they head back when Theresa pointed toward a small copse of trees near the creek. "There is a calf over there," she said, lying down and not moving. Thaddeus followed her gaze and felt his stomach tighten. She was right. He urged Duke forward at a trot, and Theresa followed on Rosie. When they reached the copse, they found a young calf lying on its side, its breathing labored. The mother cow was nearby, lowing anxiously. Thaddeus dismounted and approached carefully. The calf was burning with fever, its eyes dull. He examined it quickly and found a deep gash on its leg, already infected and swollen. "Snake bite, most likely," he said grimly. "Or maybe caught on barbed wire and it got infected. Either way, it is in bad shape." Theresa had dismounted as well, and she knelt beside the calf, her good hand gently touching its neck. "The infection is advanced," she said quietly, "but we might be able to save it if we act quickly. We need to clean the wound, drain the infection, and get willow bark tea into it to bring down the fever." Thaddeus looked at her in surprise. "You know animal doctoring. I told you, my father was a veterinarian," she reminded him. "I assisted him with cases like this many times." "Do you have supplies at the house?" "Some," he said. "Basic things, but yes, I think we have what we need." "Then we need to get the calf back to the barn," Theresa said. "Can we manage it with my arm in a sling?" Thaddeus studied the calf, which was young enough that he could probably lift it across his saddle. "I can carry it, but you are right, we need to move quickly." With some effort, he managed to get the calf across Duke's saddle and secured it there. The mother cow followed, still anxious as they made their way back to the ranch. Once in the barn, Thaddeus laid the calf in a clean stall filled with fresh straw, and Theresa immediately went to work directing him on what to do. She talked him through cleaning the wound with water boiled with salt, lancing the worst of the infection, and applying a poultice made from herbs she found in his medical supplies. Her instructions were clear and precise, and despite only having one good arm, she managed to help hold the calf still while he worked. By the time they finished, both of them were sweating and exhausted, but the calf seemed marginally better, its breathing a bit easier. "We should get willow bark tea into it every few hours," Theresa said, sitting back against the stall wall. "And keep the wound clean and dressed. If we are lucky, the fever will break by tomorrow." "Thank you," Thaddeus said, sitting beside her in the straw. "I would not have known half of what to do. That calf would probably have died." "We are not out of the woods yet," Theresa cautioned, "but I think we have a chance." She looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that had not been there before, a warmth that felt like the beginning of trust. "Your father, did he teach you ranching?" "Everything I know," Thaddeus said. "He was a good man, tough but fair. He believed in treating animals with respect and working hard and being honest. I try to live by what he taught me." "He would be proud of what you have built here," Theresa said softly. "I hope so," Thaddeus replied. "What about your father? What was he like?" Theresa was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. He was stubborn and opinionated, but he had the biggest heart of anyone I have ever known. He would help anyone who needed it, often to our own detriment. After my mother died, he threw himself into work, maybe to avoid the grief. He taught me everything he knew because he said a woman needed to be able to stand on her own feet in this world. I did not always appreciate it at the time, especially when other girls were learning embroidery and I was learning to stitch up a horse's wound. But now, I am grateful. He sounds like a good father, Thaddeus said. He was, Theresa agreed, and he heard the grief in her voice. I miss him every day. They sat there in companionable silence for a while, and Thaddeus felt something shifting between them, a barrier coming down. They were still strangers in many ways, but this moment, working together to save the calf, sharing stories about their fathers, felt like a bridge being built. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Thaddeus handled the heavy work while Theresa did what she could with one arm, and together they tended the sick calf every few hours. Theresa proved to be an excellent cook, despite her limitations, and the house began to feel more like a home with her presence. She rearranged things to be more efficient, added small touches like wildflowers in a jar on the table, and somehow made the space feel warmer. The calf improved steadily, its fever breaking on the third day. By the end of the first week, it was standing and nursing from its mother again, and Theresa declared it would make a full recovery. "You saved it," Thaddeus said one evening as they watched the calf from the barn door. "We saved it," Theresa corrected. "I could not have done it without your hands to do the work." "Still," he insisted, "you knew what to do. That knowledge made the difference." She smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes, and Thaddeus felt his heart do something strange in his chest. She was beautiful when she smiled, he realized, though beauty was not quite the right word. She was luminous, alive, vibrant in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness, and everything to do with the fierce spirit that animated her. On Sunday morning, just over a week after Theresa's arrival, Thaddeus suggested they go into town for church services. Theresa agreed, and they took the wagon, both of them dressed in their best clothes. The church was a simple white building with a bell tower, and it was already filling up when they arrived. Reverend Michaels, a middle-aged man with a kind face and a booming voice, greeted them at the door. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Theresa's arm in its sling, but he welcomed her warmly and introduced her to several of the congregation members. Throughout the service, Thaddeus was aware of the curious glances directed their way. Benton was a small town, and a new mail-order bride was news, especially one with a broken arm. After the service, several women approached to welcome Theresa and offer help if she needed it. There was Mrs. Patterson from the restaurant, young Sarah Jenkins, who was recently married herself, and Martha Crosby, the blacksmith's wife who had a reputation for kindness. "You must come to the ladies' social next week," Martha said, taking Theresa's good hand. "We meet every Thursday afternoon at the church. It is nothing fancy, just sewing and conversation, but it is a chance to get to know everyone." "I would like that," Theresa said, and Thaddeus could hear that she meant it. For all her independence and strength, she must be lonely out at the ranch with only him for company. As they were about to leave, Reverend Michaels approached them. "Thaddeus, Miss Garrett, might I have a word?" They followed him to a quiet corner of the churchyard, and the Reverend said gently, "I understand the two of you are planning to marry." "Yes, sir," Thaddeus said. "Whenever Theresa is ready." "I see," the Reverend said. "Miss Garrett, forgive me for being direct, but I want to make sure you are entering into this marriage willingly. Sometimes in these mail-order bride situations, there can be pressure or circumstances that make it difficult to speak freely. If you have any doubts or concerns, please know that you have friends here who will help you. Theresa looked surprised, then touched. Thank you, Reverend. That is kind of you, but I assure you I am entering into this willingly. Thaddeus has been nothing but respectful and considerate. I have no concerns about marrying him. The Reverend studied her for a moment, then nodded. I am glad to hear it. When would you like the ceremony to take place? Theresa glanced at Thaddeus, and he saw the question in her eyes. He gave her a small nod, leaving the decision to her. Perhaps in 2 weeks, she suggested. That will give time for my arm to heal a bit more and for people to be notified if they wish to attend. 2 weeks it is, the Reverend agreed. I will make the announcement next Sunday. May God bless your union. As they drove back to the ranch, Thaddeus said, You did not have to set a date if you were not ready. I would have waited. I know, Theresa said, but I am ready. You have kept your word about giving me space and time, and I appreciate that, but I also see no reason to delay. We work well together, and I think we can build a good life. That is more than many marriages start with. That is true, Thaddeus agreed, though he found himself wishing she sounded a bit more enthusiastic about marrying him. But he reminded himself that this was a practical arrangement, not a love match. Friendship and partnership were more than he had expected when he placed that advertisement, and he should be grateful for what they had. The next 2 weeks passed quickly. The ranch kept them busy, and Theresa's arm continued to heal well. She began to do more around the house and yard, and Thaddeus caught himself watching her more often than he should, noticing the way she hummed while she worked, the way she talked to the chickens as she gathered eggs, the way her face lit up when she laughed at something he said. He was falling in love with her, he realized one afternoon while watching her tend the garden she had started near the house. The realization hit him like a kick from a horse, unexpected and jarring. He had not planned on this. He had wanted a partner, a companion, someone to share the work and the life. But somewhere in the daily rhythms of living together, in the small kindnesses and shared jokes, in the way she challenged him and made him think, he had started to feel something deeper. The problem was, he had no idea if she felt the same way. She was warm and friendly, and they worked together seamlessly, but she had been clear from the start that she was here for practical reasons. She had never given any indication that her feelings had changed, and he was afraid to ask, afraid to risk the easy friendship they had built. The wedding was held on a sunny Saturday afternoon in late July. Theresa wore a simple but lovely dress of pale blue that she had made herself in the evenings, working carefully around her healing arm. Thaddeus wore his best suit, brushed and pressed, and felt more nervous than he had ever been in his life. The church was full. It seemed like half the town had turned out, and Thaddeus was grateful for the support even as he felt overwhelmed by all the attention. He stood at the front with Reverend Michaels, and when Theresa walked down the aisle alone with no family to give her away, his heart ached for her. But she held her head high, and when she reached his side, she gave him a small, genuine smile that settled his nerves. The ceremony was simple and traditional. They exchanged vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for as long as they both lived. Thaddeus slipped a simple gold band onto Theresa's finger, a ring that had belonged to his mother. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife and said he could kiss the bride, Thaddeus hesitated, unsure. But Theresa stepped closer and tilted her face up, and he kissed her softly, briefly, feeling the warmth of her lips against his and wishing the moment could last longer. There was a reception at the church with food and dancing, and Thaddeus and Theresa endured the good-natured teasing and congratulations with as much grace as they could muster. Martha Crosby had organized the whole thing, and Thaddeus made a mental note to thank her properly later. As the sun began to set, they finally made their excuses and headed home in the wagon. The summer evening was warm and pleasant, and they rode in comfortable silence for a while before Theresa said, "That was nice. Everyone was very kind." "They were," Thaddeus agreed. "Benton is a good town, for the most part. People look out for each other." When they reached the ranch, Thaddeus helped Theresa down from the wagon and they stood there in the yard for a moment, suddenly awkward with each other. They were married now. This was their wedding night. Thaddeus had said he would not force anything, and he meant it, but he also did not know what she expected or wanted. "Theresa," he began, but she put her hand on his arm. "I know what I said when I first arrived," she said quietly, "about being prepared to fulfill my duties. But I wonder if you would mind if we continued as we have been for a while longer. My arm is healing well, but it is still tender, and I think I would like more time before we take that step. Is that all right?" Relief and disappointment warred in Thaddeus's chest, but relief won out. "Of course," he said. "I told you there was no rush, and I meant it. We have all the time in the world." "Thank you," she said, and rose on her toes to kiss his cheek. "You are a good man, Thaddeus Ashford." They went inside, and the evening proceeded much as their other evenings had, with small chores and quiet conversation. But when bedtime came and Theresa went to the bedroom that was now technically theirs, Thaddeus started toward the ladder to the loft. "Thaddeus," Theresa called, and he turned. She stood in the bedroom doorway, her expression uncertain. "Would you mind if we at least shared the room? Not the bed, I mean, but the room. You could bring your bedroll down and sleep on the floor if you want. I know it sounds strange, but I think I would feel better not being completely alone. I have not slept well since the accident, and I keep having nightmares about being trapped in the overturned coach." Thaddeus's heart swelled with tenderness for her, for the vulnerability she was showing. "I do not mind at all," he said gently. "Let me get my things." He brought down his bedroll and spread it on the floor beside the bed, and they settled in for the night. Lying there in the darkness, Thaddeus could hear Theresa's breathing, and somehow her presence made the room feel less lonely than the loft had ever been. "Thaddeus," she whispered after a while. "Yes, thank you for everything, for being patient and kind, for not making me feel foolish or weak." "You are the furthest thing from weak," he said. "You are the strongest person I have ever met." He heard her shift in the bed above him, and then her hand dangled down over the side. Without thinking, he reached up and took it, and they lay there connected by that simple touch until sleep claimed them both. The weeks that followed their wedding were some of the happiest Thaddeus could remember. With Theresa's arm healing steadily, they fell into an even better rhythm of working together. She took over more of the household tasks and began helping with lighter ranch work as well. She proved to have a gift with the horses, and several of the more skittish animals that Thaddeus had trouble with calmed under her patient handling. They continued to share the bedroom, with Thaddeus on his bedroll on the floor, and most nights Theresa would reach down and he would take her hand, and they would drift off to sleep connected. It was a strange arrangement, perhaps, but it worked for them, and Thaddeus found he slept better knowing she was close. One evening in late August, about 5 weeks after the wedding, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Theresa said, "I saw Doc Holloway in town yesterday when I went for supplies. He examined my arm and said it has healed remarkably well. He gave me some exercises to do to strengthen it, but he says I can take the sling off permanently now." "That is wonderful news," Thaddeus said, genuinely pleased. "How does it feel?" "Weak," she admitted, "and stiff, but it is good to have both hands back." She flexed her fingers, then looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "I have been thinking about what I said on our wedding night, about wanting more time. Thaddeus's heart started beating faster. "Yes, I think I was afraid," she said slowly. "Not of you, but of intimacy in general. My mother died when I was 17, and I never had anyone to talk to about such things. The other women in our community were kind but distant, and my father certainly was not going to discuss it. I came here knowing it would be expected but not really understanding what it would mean." She paused, gathering her courage. "But these past weeks, living with you, working beside you, I have started to feel differently. You have become dear to me, Thaddeus, more than a friend. And I think I would like to try to be a true wife to you if you still want that." Thaddeus turned to look at her fully, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Theresa, I need you to know something. When we married, I thought it was just a practical arrangement. But somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. I did not mean to, and I did not expect it, but it happened anyway. If we take this step, I want you to know that for me, it will mean something. It will mean everything." Her eyes widened, and he saw hope and wonder bloom in them. "You love me." "I do," he said simply. "I think I started falling the moment I saw you climb down from that stagecoach with your broken arm and your stubborn pride, and every day since has just made me more certain." "Oh, Thaddeus," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "I love you too. I did not realize it until recently, but I do. The thought of building a life with you, of having children with you, of growing old together, it does not frighten me anymore. It fills me with hope." He reached out and cupped her face gently, his thumb stroking her cheek. "Are you sure?" "I do not want to rush you." "I am sure," she said firmly, and then she leaned forward and kissed him. This kiss was nothing like the chaste peck at their wedding. This was deep and passionate, full of all the longing and affection that had been building between them for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Thaddeus stood and offered her his hand. "Come with me, wife," he said softly, and she placed her hand in his and let him lead her inside. That night, in the bedroom they had been sharing chastely for weeks, they finally became husband and wife in every sense. Thaddeus was gentle and patient, and Theresa, though nervous at first, responded to him with a passion that matched his own. When they finally lay together afterward, her head on his chest and his arms around her, Thaddeus thought he had never been happier in his entire life. "Never alone again," he murmured into her hair. "You will never have to face anything alone again." "Neither will you," she replied, holding him tighter. "We are partners now in everything." And they were. As summer turned to fall and then to winter, they continued to build their life together. The ranch prospered under their joint management, and the relationship between them deepened into something rich and abiding. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, learned to communicate without words, learned to support each other through challenges, and celebrate together through triumphs. In October, an early cold snap threatened the herd, and they worked around the clock to get the cattle moved to shelter and ensure none were lost to the cold. Theresa proved herself as tough as any ranch hand, working alongside Thaddeus without complaint, despite the brutal conditions. When it was over and they had not lost a single animal, Thaddeus held her close and thanked God for sending him such a partner. In December, Theresa discovered she was pregnant. She told Thaddeus one evening after supper, her eyes shining with joy and a little fear. He swept her up in his arms, carefully mindful of her condition, and spun her around, laughing. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, searching his face. "I know it is sooner than we might have planned." "I am thrilled," he assured her. "I cannot wait to meet our child, to see your eyes or my stubborn chin in a little face, to teach them everything we know and watch them grow." The winter was mild, thankfully, and Theresa's pregnancy progressed smoothly. She continued to work around the ranch as much as her growing belly allowed, and Thaddeus hovered protectively, always worried she was doing too much. She tolerated his concern with good humor, understanding it came from love. In March, the ladies of Benton threw a surprise baby shower for Theresa at the church. She was overwhelmed by the generosity of these women who had become her friends, and she came home with blankets, tiny clothes, and more advice than she knew what to do with. Martha Crosby had become especially close to her, and Theresa confided in her about her fears regarding childbirth, since she had no mother to guide her. Martha, who had 4 children of her own, reassured her and promised to be there when the time came. The baby came in late July, almost exactly a year after Theresa had arrived in Benton. The labor was long and difficult, and Thaddeus paced the porch while Martha and Doc Holloway attended Theresa inside. He had assisted with countless animal births, but this was different. This was his wife, his love, and the fear of something going wrong nearly paralyzed him. Finally, as dawn was breaking, he heard the sharp cry of a newborn, and Martha came to the door with a huge smile. "You have a son, Thaddeus. A healthy, strong son. And Theresa is tired but fine." He rushed inside to find Theresa propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but radiantly happy, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets from the shower. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, and he went to her, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "Look at him," she whispered. "Look at our son." Thaddeus gazed down at the tiny red face peeking out from the blanket, at the miniature fingers curled into fists, and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "Absolutely perfect. Thank you, Theresa. Thank you for this gift." "What should we name him?" she asked. They had discussed names over the winter, and Thaddeus said, "I was thinking maybe after both our fathers, James Daniel, we could call him Jamie." "James Daniel Ashford," Theresa said, testing the name. "I love it. Hello, Jamie. Welcome to the world." The baby fussed, and then settled, and they spent the next hour just marveling at him, at the miracle they had created together. When Jamie started to root around hungrily, Doc Holloway and Martha excused themselves, and Theresa nursed the baby for the first time while Thaddeus watched in wonder. "You are amazing," he told her. "I know women have babies every day, but you are still amazing." "It helps when you have someone worth doing it for," she replied, smiling at him over their son's head. The next few months were an exhausting blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, but also filled with incredible joy. Thaddeus discovered a capacity for tenderness he had not known he possessed, rocking his son in the middle of the night while Theresa caught a few precious hours of sleep, talking to the baby about the ranch and the life they would build together. By the time Jamie was 6 months old, the routine had stabilized, and life settled into a new normal. Theresa managed to balance caring for the baby with helping around the ranch, often carrying Jamie in a sling while she gathered eggs or tended the garden. Thaddeus marveled at her ability to handle everything with such grace. One evening in early spring, when Jamie was 9 months old and starting to crawl, they sat together on the porch watching him explore the wooden boards under close supervision. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and orange, and Thaddeus felt a deep contentment settle over him. "You ever regret it?" he asked Theresa quietly. "Answering that advertisement, coming here to marry a stranger?" She looked at him in surprise, then reached over and took his hand. "Not for a single moment. My life in Ohio was over and I had no future there, but here I have everything, a home, a purpose, a family." She squeezed his hand. "I have you. And I love this life we have built together more than I ever imagined possible." "I love you," Thaddeus said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it. "I thank God every day that he sent you to me." "I love you too," she replied. "And I know my father would have approved of you." He always said that a good partner was worth more than gold, and he was right. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their son, and then Jamie crawled over and pulled himself up on his father's leg, babbling happily. Thaddeus scooped him up and held him high, making the baby shriek with laughter, and Theresa watched them with a soft smile. As the years passed, the ranch continued to thrive. Thaddeus and Theresa worked as a seamless team, making decisions together and supporting each other through the inevitable challenges that came with ranching. They added more land, increased the herd, and built a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Jamie grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved following his father around and learning everything about the ranch. When he was 3, Theresa became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Rachel Marie, after Thaddeus's mother. Rachel had her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes, and she was as sweet-natured as her brother was adventurous. 2 years after Rachel came another son, Samuel Thomas, who had his father's serious demeanor and his mother's practical nature. And 3 years after that, the final addition to their family arrived, another girl they named Elizabeth Grace, who was spirited and stubborn and kept them all on their toes. The house had to be expanded to accommodate the growing family, and Thaddeus built 2 additional bedrooms upstairs and extended the porch. With 4 children, the house was always full of noise and activity, and while there were certainly challenging moments, Thaddeus and Theresa never forgot how blessed they were. Martha Crosby remained Theresa's closest friend, and their children grew up together, often spending long summer days playing at each other's ranches. The community of Benton embraced the Ashford family fully, and they became active members of the church and the social fabric of the town. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thaddeus arranged for Martha to watch the children for an evening, and he took Theresa back to the spot where they had sat on their wedding day, where she had told him she wanted to be a true wife to him. He had brought a blanket and a picnic supper, and they sat together watching the sunset just as they had done that evening years ago. 10 years, Theresa said, leaning against his shoulder. It feels like a lifetime and like yesterday all at once. Do you remember what I said to you that night? Thaddeus asked. After we were together for the first time, you said I would never be alone again, she replied softly, and you have kept that promise every single day. You kept it too, he said. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to build something bigger than myself. I was lonely before you came, even though I did not realize how lonely until you were here and I suddenly was not. We saved each other, Theresa said. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go, and I gave you companionship when you were isolated. But we also gave each other something more important than that. We gave each other love. Thaddeus turned and kissed her deeply, and the years fell away until they might have been those newlyweds again, discovering each other for the first time. When they finally pulled apart, he said, I would choose you again. If I had it all to do over, knowing everything, I would still choose you. And I would choose you, she replied. Every time. Always. They stayed there until the stars came out, talking about the past and dreaming about the future, about watching their children grow and possibly having grandchildren someday, about growing old together on this land they both loved. When they finally returned home, the children were all asleep, and they thanked Martha and saw her out before checking on each child, pulling up blankets and placing soft kisses on sleeping heads. In their own bedroom, the same room where they had shared so much over the years, they held each other close, and Thaddeus thought about how far they had come from that day when a woman with a broken arm had climbed down from a stagecoach and changed his life forever. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. There were droughts that tested their resolve and their resources, requiring them to dig new wells and carefully manage their water. There were harsh winters when they lost livestock despite their best efforts, and there were illnesses that swept through the family, keeping Theresa up night after night nursing sick children back to health. But there were also moments of pure joy and triumph. The year Jamie turned 12, he won first prize at the county fair for a calf he had raised and trained himself, and the pride on his face as he accepted the ribbon made all the hard work worthwhile. Rachel showed an early aptitude for music, and Thaddeus saved up to buy a used piano from a family moving back east, delighting in the sound of music filling their home. Samuel proved to have his mother's gift for animal medicine, often helping her when treating sick livestock. And Elizabeth, true to her spirited nature, announced at age 6 that she was going to be a rancher just like her father, and no one doubted she meant it. As the children grew older, they each took on more responsibilities around the ranch, and Thaddeus made sure to teach them not just the practical skills of ranching but also the values he held dear: hard work, honesty, kindness, and respect for others. Theresa ensured they were all well educated, teaching them reading, writing, and arithmetic at the kitchen table when they were not helping with chores, and insisting they attend school in town whenever possible. The ranch prospered enough that Thaddeus was able to hire 2 permanent ranch hands, giving him and Theresa a bit more time to spend with the children and each other. They built a small bunkhouse for the hands and treated them fairly, and in return received loyalty and hard work that helped the ranch grow even more. When Jamie turned 18, Thaddeus deeded him a portion of the land to start his own herd, wanting to give his son the same opportunity his father had given him. Jamie, who had grown into a tall, capable young man, was overwhelmed by the gesture and worked tirelessly to prove himself worthy of the trust. Rachel, at 16, had become a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and grace. She helped Theresa with the younger children and the household, but Thaddeus and Theresa both encouraged her to pursue her love of music, knowing that she might not want to spend her whole life on the ranch. When a music teacher in Little Rock offered to take her on as a student, they had long discussions about whether to let her go, ultimately deciding that they wanted their children to have choices, even if those choices meant leaving home. Samuel, at 14, was steady and reliable, already talking about possibly becoming a veterinarian like his grandfather had been. Thaddeus and Theresa promised to help him get the education he would need, proud that he wanted to follow in those footsteps. And Elizabeth, at 11, was still declaring she would be a rancher, spending every spare moment following her father and brother around, learning everything she could. Thaddeus had no doubt she would succeed at whatever she set her mind to. On their 20th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Martha and her husband Silas came, along with several other friends from town. There was music and dancing, plenty of food, and heartfelt toasts to the enduring love between Thaddeus and Theresa. At one point in the evening, Reverend Michaels, now much older but still serving the church, pulled them aside. "I remember when you two came to me to set your wedding date," he said with a smile. "I confess, I had my doubts. Mail-order marriages do not always work out, and you were both so practical about it. But I am happy to say I was wrong to doubt. You two have built something truly special, not just a marriage but a family and a legacy. You are an inspiration to this whole community." "We were blessed," Theresa said simply. "We found each other at the right time and we were willing to work at building something together. That is all it takes, really. Love and effort and faith." As the evening wound down and the guests departed, the family sat together on the expanded porch, watching fireflies dance in the warm summer darkness. The children were talking and laughing, and Thaddeus sat with his arm around Theresa, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for everything they had. "What are you thinking about?" Theresa asked softly, noticing his contemplative expression. "I am thinking about that first day," he said. "When you stepped off that stagecoach with your broken arm and your stubborn pride, I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met. And I was right. You are brave and strong, and you have made my life infinitely better just by being in it." "You gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go," Theresa replied. "You gave me safety and respect and love. You kept your promise that I would never be alone again, and I will always be grateful for that." "It was not just a promise to you," Thaddeus said. "It was a promise to myself too, because the truth is, you are not the only one who was alone before we met. I was isolated and lonely, and I did not even realize how much until you arrived and everything changed. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to build something lasting. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Theresa turned and kissed him, a kiss that held 20 years of shared history, of challenges overcome and joys celebrated, of a love that had only deepened with time. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his and whispered, "I love you, Thaddeus Ashford, today and always." "I love you too, Theresa Ashford," he replied, "more than words can ever say." The years continued to pass, and the children grew into adulthood one by one. Jamie married a young woman from a neighboring ranch and built a house on his portion of the land, starting his own family while still working closely with his father. Rachel did go to Little Rock to study music, and eventually became a music teacher herself, though she visited home often and always said the ranch was where her heart truly lay. Samuel pursued his dream of becoming a veterinarian, studying in Memphis, and then returning to Benton to open a practice, becoming as beloved in the community as his grandfather had been. And Elizabeth, true to her word, became a rancher, eventually taking over the day-to-day management of the Broken Creek Ranch as Thaddeus and Theresa grew older. Grandchildren arrived, filling the house once again with the sounds of young voices and laughter. Thaddeus and Theresa loved being grandparents, enjoying the opportunity to spoil the little ones and then send them back to their parents. They took delight in watching their own children navigate the challenges of parenthood, offering advice when asked, but mostly just providing support and love. As they entered their 60s, both Thaddeus and Theresa began to slow down physically, though their minds remained sharp and their love as strong as ever. They handed over more and more of the ranch operations to Jamie and Elizabeth, content to take a less active role and spend their time enjoying each other's company. They would often sit together on the porch in the evenings, just as they had done throughout their marriage, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. Sometimes they talked, reminiscing about the past or discussing the present. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, needing no words to communicate the depth of their connection. One evening, when Thaddeus was 68 and Theresa was 66, they were sitting on the porch as usual when she said, "Do you have any regrets?" Looking back on our life together, Thaddeus thought about it seriously, wanting to give her an honest answer. "I regret that my father did not live to meet you or our children," he said. "I think he would have loved you, and I know he would have been proud of what we built. And I regret the hardships we faced, though I know they made us stronger. But as for anything between you and me, anything about our marriage or our life together, no, not a single regret, none," Theresa said firmly. "There were difficult times, certainly. Times when money was tight or children were sick, or the ranch demanded everything we had. but I never once regretted marrying you or coming to Arkansas or building this life. Every challenge was worth it because we faced it together. Do you ever think about that girl who stepped off the stagecoach with a broken arm? Thaddeus asked. The one who set her own bone with branches and petticoat strips. Theresa laughed softly. Sometimes. She seems like a different person now, so young and scared, trying so hard to be brave. But I suppose she is still in here somewhere, that stubborn determination that kept her going. She was remarkable, Thaddeus said, and she grew into an even more remarkable woman. I am so proud of everything you have accomplished, everything you are. We accomplished it together, Theresa corrected gently. That is what I want our children and grandchildren to understand. We were successful not because either of us was exceptional on our own, but because we worked as partners, supporting each other and building on each other's strengths. That is the real secret to a lasting marriage. You are right, Thaddeus agreed, as you usually are. She laughed again and swatted his arm playfully. Not always. Remember when I insisted we should plant corn in the south field and it turned out the soil was not right? Or when I thought we should buy those horses from that traveling trader and they turned out to be half wild and took months to gentle? I remember, Thaddeus said with a smile. But I also remember all the times you were right and I was wrong. Like when you said we should diversify our income by raising chickens for eggs to sell in town. Or when you insisted we needed to build a bigger barn even though I thought the old one was fine. Your instincts have always been good. They sat in companionable silence for a while, and then Theresa said, I want you to know something. When I die, whenever that may be, I want you to know that I died happy. I lived a full life, loved and was loved, and that is all anyone can ask for. Do not talk about dying, Thaddeus said, his voice roughening with emotion. We have years left yet. I hope so, Theresa said, but we are getting older and it is something we should discuss. I just want you to promise me that if I go first, you will not shut yourself away. You will stay connected to the children and grandchildren. You will keep living and finding joy. Promise me. Only if you promise the same, Thaddeus said. If I go first, you keep living, keep finding reasons to smile. Deal. Deal. Theresa agreed, and they shook on it, then held hands and watched the last of the daylight fade. As it turned out, they both lived well into their 70s, continuing to be active and engaged with their family and community. They celebrated 50 years of marriage with a huge party that drew people from all over the county, and the outpouring of love and respect was overwhelming. By that time, they had 8 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The Broken Creek Ranch had grown to nearly 1,000 acres, run primarily by Elizabeth and Jamie with help from their own children. The Ashford name was synonymous with quality and integrity in the region, and it was all built on the foundation that Thaddeus and Theresa had laid so many years ago. When Thaddeus was 76, he developed a persistent cough that would not go away. Doc Holloway had long since retired, and his son now ran the practice, but young Dr. Holloway was just as competent as his father had been. He diagnosed Thaddeus with a lung condition, likely from years of breathing in dust and working outdoors in all weather. He prescribed treatments and rest, and Theresa fussed over him constantly, making sure he followed the doctor's orders. But Thaddeus knew his time was coming. He could feel it in his bones, in the increasing difficulty of drawing breath, in the way his body was slowly giving out. He did not fear death, but he did fear leaving Theresa, even knowing she was surrounded by family and would be well cared for. One spring evening, as they sat together on the porch watching yet another sunset, he said, "Theresa, I need to tell you something." "I know," she said quietly, tears already forming in her eyes. "I know what you are going to say. I am not going to be here much longer, he said gently. I can feel it, and I need you to know that every day with you was a gift. You were the answer to a prayer I did not even know how to pray. You gave me everything I ever wanted and so much more. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and that is saying something because I fell in love with you pretty quickly. I love you too, Theresa said, tears streaming down her face now. And I am not ready to let you go. I know it is selfish, but I am not ready. I know, he said, pulling her close. I am not ready to go either, but when the time comes, I need you to remember your promise. Keep living, keep finding joy. Our children and grandchildren need you, and you have so much still to give. Do not let grief consume you. I will try, she promised. But you have to promise me something too. Wait for me. When my time comes, you be there waiting and we will find each other again. Promise me. I promise, he said, holding her as they both wept. Thaddeus passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks later with Theresa holding his hand. The entire community turned out for his funeral, testament to the life he had lived and the impact he had made. He was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, under an oak tree where he had often sat with his children and grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days. Theresa grieved deeply, but she kept her promise. She remained active with the family, spending time with her children and grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom. She continued to live in the ranch house, though Elizabeth and her family moved in to be with her, not wanting her to be alone. She lived for 3 more years after Thaddeus passed, years filled with both sorrow and continued joy. She saw 2 more great-grandchildren born, attended Rachel's son's wedding, and helped Samuel write a book about veterinary medicine based on her father's techniques and Samuel's own experience. When Theresa died peacefully in her sleep at age 79, her family gathered around her grave next to Thaddeus's, and her children spoke of a woman who had been brave, strong, loving, and wise. They told stories of how she had arrived in Arkansas with a broken arm she had set herself, how she had worked alongside their father to build a lasting legacy, and how her love had shaped all of their lives. The Broken Creek Ranch continued to thrive under the management of subsequent generations. Each one taught the values that Thaddeus and Theresa had instilled: hard work, integrity, compassion, and the importance of family. The story of the mail-order bride who arrived with a broken arm and the cowboy who promised she would never be alone again became family legend, passed down through the years as an example of what true love and partnership could accomplish. And if you were to visit that hill where 2 graves sit side by side under the old oak tree, you would see that someone always keeps fresh flowers there, and the inscriptions on the simple headstones tell the story in brief. Thaddeus Ashford, beloved husband, father, grandfather, never alone. And beside it, Theresa Ashford, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, never alone again. Their love story had ended in the way all mortal stories must, but the legacy they built together lived on in their children and their children's children, in the land they had tended and the community they had served. They had started as strangers brought together by necessity and circumstance, and they had forged a bond that transcended time and death, proving that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. The ranch still stands today, run by the 5th generation of Ashfords, and in the main house, now expanded and modernized but still recognizable, there hangs a photograph from Thaddeus and Theresa's 50th anniversary. In it, they sit together on the porch, his arm around her, both of them looking at each other rather than the camera, and the love in their expressions is so clear and pure that it moves everyone who sees it. Below the photograph is a small plaque with Thaddeus's words from that first night they were truly together. never alone again. It serves as a reminder to each new generation of Ashfords that love is not just a feeling but a promise, a commitment, a choice made every single day to stand beside your partner through whatever comes. It is a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take a chance on someone, to open your heart despite the risks, and to build something together that will outlast you both. And so the story of the mail-order bride with the broken arm and the cowboy who loved her lives on, not just as a tale from the past, but as a living testament to the power of love, partnership, and the courage to reach for happiness even when the future is uncertain. It is a story that began with pain and uncertainty, and ended with joy and legacy, proving that sometimes the very things that seem like obstacles are actually the path to exactly where we need to be.